Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to another video. This time is my history with Final Fantasy Part 2. I know I mentioned on the other video that it was Part 3. I got ahead of myself. I meant to say Part 2. However, I do have Part 3 stuff kind of ready to go, so I'm guessing that'll be next week's video. So let's get started with the history of Final Fantasy Part 2. The first game we'll be looking at today is Final Fantasy 13. I want to do this little history thing a little bit differently, and maybe you can follow along. It's just gonna be like positives, negatives, things that I just thought when I was playing these games. So let's do that with 13. So 13 still is and was a gorgeous looking game back when it came out in 2009. And I must also preface that this was a game that was played on the PlayStation 3, and my older brother would play this one. So some more positives here. We got, another one is like after, I got around to playing this game, I thought it was fun. I thought it was interesting, somewhat compelling. And by what's compelling, I mean the strategy of the combat, as well as like the backgrounds, environments, and some of the characters. Some of the characters are fairly interesting. I can see why people don't particularly haven't really opened up to Lightning in the very beginning. Like, she's kind of on the front cover and everything, and she's kind of like one of the more bland characters in the very beginning. It kind of just goes to like Snow, Hope, and Zaz a little bit in the very beginning, which I think is fine. It's more of a diverse character cast in the very beginning. And the other positive, of course, is that I still want to play this game. And the soundtrack is fan-friggin-tastic, of course. Here we go. Here's a little positive negative here. There is an archive file thing similar to Type 0 to fill in some gaps in the story. And I'll eventually explain this when I get to Type 0 a little bit more. However, this game doesn't really show, it doesn't show more than it tells. And they really rely on this archive system to really fill in these gaps. But, I mean, as someone that doesn't mind seeing this in their games, for a person that doesn't play games as often as I do, this can be a little off-putting. That's why I said it's kind of like a positive and a negative. I'm happy that it's there, but I dislike that you can't show me these kinds of things, even just a little bit, So that's what leads on to like another negative, which means it's not as immersive as another game in this like series of games that they were supposed to do, which is like Cristo, like Fabula Nova Crystallis or something like that. It's not as immersive as Type 0's story, because in Type 0's story they show you more than they tell you. And if you want a little bit more background on some of these characters and stuff, there's your library, but 13's is kind of just like, you're playing through certain things, you get a little bit. If you want to know more, you can know more. If you don't, move on. Which, I mean, okay. Moving on to the next game. And that next game happens to be the sequel to 13, 13-2. As usual, let's get the positives out of the way. 13-2 is better at getting me hooked and wanting to find out more on what is going on. Story-wise, when I was watching 13, I was just, enamored with the graphics and stuff, but I didn't even know what the freak was going on. I just saw my brother just grind a lot. And there was a grid, a kind of a spherous grid thingy, the crystal thing, crystarium. It's similar to the sphere grid in that sense, but it didn't really hook me in. But this game kind of did, with its combat and strategy being less off-putting and more welcoming, which then makes it less stressful. And there's like a leveling system and monster collecting, which at this time I kind of liked. So yeah, there was a lot of positives there for 13 too. It didn't receive as good a number of scores as 13, which, I mean, once I got to play it, I couldn't kind of see it, but I think this game's just a little bit more up my alley. And well, anyways, let's get to that one positive and negative I have here, which is, from what I have seen, 13 had a more diverse character story. The reason that is like a positive negative is like, it's good that this game is like more focused, because like with 13, I was explaining like the very beginning, it's primarily focused on like Zaz, Hope, and Snow a little bit more. And by that I mean like their stories are more interesting compared to Lightning's story, who's the main character. In this game, it's Sarah and Noel, and I like that it's focusing more on them than it is focusing on other characters. But at the same time, I kind of liked the diverse storytelling from the get-go, because it's good that you want to establish a strong character, because I mean it's kind of off-putting a little bit that, you know, it takes a little while for Lightning to be more interesting. So it's cool that they make them interesting in the beginning so that they want you to play more. So some negatives. We are here after the time the story became less important, thus becoming bland. Yeah, it has like the same problem as 13, in that the sense that after a little time, the story or the world kind of opens up, and you kind of have to get rid of these like apparition kind of things, and in order for you to like progress into the story, you have to do a certain number of them to progress or whatever. But it became more of like a law of attrition in order for you to like advance the story. And with like 13, it's kind of like, now the world is open, and in this case, like now the timeline is like somewhat open. It just makes it kind of like the story take a back seat in the sense of world building. And they kind of didn't do it right twice, which is kind of sad. I mean, gameplay wise it makes it more fun, but story wise it makes it kind of bland. You kind of have to get your characters, or not the characters, but you kind of have to get the player invested into wanting to do these things more so than like you have to do these things in order for you to get like a better ending or something, which again can be off-putting. And then in 13's sense, it's kind of like, well, like, you know, if you want to know more about like the world and how these people became X, Y, and Z, you should do these things. And it's kind of just like, well, that's kind of boring. I'd rather just, I mean, it's cool, but then it's like, it's kind of boring at the same time. The ending and its frustrating cliffhanger. Yeah, so like doing all of that work just for you to get that ending. And that ending is like, it made me frustrated, like watching it, because you get invested into Noel and Sarah only for you to find out it's about Lightning again. And it's like, she was hardly in this story, and it kind of just like punches the character, not the character, kind of punches the player in the face, like, screw you for getting invested into these characters. Now it's Lightning's turn. It's like, what? I understand like she's like the warrior goddess or whatever, but still, like, it's all about saving Lightning. It's all about doing this. And it's like, man, this was only like a quest to like do one thing, and it kind of just seemed like it seemed like a huge detour. Like the story, I'm not saying the story could have been skipped or anything, but it just seemed like a huge just detour. I want to be more invested in the people that I'm playing. And if you want to say at the very end, like this whole, like, they don't know what their quest is for, and then at the very end they find out their quest is X, Y, and Z, that would be pretty cool, which is what they did right in Lightning Returns, and I like that. However, this game was a big slap to the face, I think, to like a player. Maybe not in the grand scheme of things, and especially not in retrospective, but I remember thinking that when I first saw that in the game. I was just like, this is ridiculous. Moving on to the next game. Oh, wait, I forgot to mention that this has great music and graphics. Of course, not as good as 13's, but still pretty good in its sense. Now I'm moving on to the next game. next game is Final Fantasy I Dawn of Souls for the Game Boy Advance. Now, I have to make a note here because I always keep forgetting to mention that, but 13 and 13-2 were kind of played when I was in high school. Or, well, my older brother played them when I was in high school. 1 and 2 Dawn of Souls was played by me right after I finished high school. I started playing it, and I finished it when I entered college. And I think that was a good time for me to get invested because it goes back to the beginning roots of Final Fantasy. So I'm glad that when I do this new chapter in my life, it's basically the beginning of the franchise. And I played this game without speed up and had a good time. And I know what you're asking, like, wait, did you play this on the Game Boy Advance? No, I actually played it through an emulator, not knowing, because I'm stupid, that you can speed up the game. However, I think I was playing the free version, so I can only go up to like 3 times. This was like way back. This was like more than 10 years ago. Yeah, it's actually more than 10 years ago that I got around to doing this. I played it without speed up, not knowing that I could speed it up. And I still enjoyed it. I still liked the accessibility of it. I liked the themes, the music, as well as as far as Final Fantasy goes, this is a good introduction to the series. Because from here on out, I think 1 and 2 kind of set the precedence to, do you want to go more towards like a turn-based era, or do you want to go more actiony? Because that's what it does. Like, you can enjoy these kinds of games, and you can find games similar to them, and this is a good introduction to these kinds of games. And then if you don't, there's games that are not too far from this one that makes you want to try something different. And saying that, there is a little positive negative here I have, and that's like the story. So I like how it's accessible, but like the story for 2, at least in this version, is a little bit better than 1. Actually, I shouldn't say a little bit. I enjoyed it a little bit more. Not a little bit, but no, I enjoyed it kind of, I don't want to say a lot more, but I enjoyed it more than 1's. And I think it's because the added things that they added to 1, it was kind of just dungeons and like maybe some bosses from other Final Fantasy games, which is okay. I like that. But 2 actually added an extra epilogue to the story. Well, it's not really an epilogue, but it kind of like, the story is coinciding with the last act of the game, and thus going into the epilogue of the game, which I liked. Now, with all positive things, there has to come some negative things, and this game has a few. A couple actually, just 2. It's outdated in some instances. So, like, again, if you're not, it's a good introduction to these kinds of, the turn-based system, magic, classes and stuff like that. But it can also be boring, which is the other thing, because like you're stuck with these classes, and if you don't like these characters, there's no way for you to change them. So if you want to start the game over, you have to start the game all over again in order for you to try something different, which can be off-putting. That's kind of like, I'm not saying that's like a deal breaker or anything. It's just a lot of games now, they cater to kind of like these more, you can try something else, and if you don't like a certain character, you can use another character, kind of thing. But it can be sometimes like that, and in some cases it can seem outdating. Those I do have to put in there, even though I don't think it was kind of outdated. I kind of like 1 and 2. I play it more than I play 3, which actually has a job system, and I'll get to that soon actually. But yeah, that's it for Final Fantasy 1 and 2 Dawn of Souls for the Game Boy Advance. The next game is Final Fantasy Tactics Advance for, well, the Game Boy Advance. Per usual, let's get some positives out of here. The game is very addicting. The mechanics are simple, not too overwhelming. The gameplay mechanics are also, when I mean by the mechanics, like game mechanics, I also mean the gameplay itself is not too difficult. However, there are some bosses that will test you, which I think is okay. As I said, it steadily gets harder, and I kind of like that. So far, I've almost beaten the game. So far, it's only to me gotten steadily harder because I kind of like the grind. Yeah. And then the last positive is I want to play it more. A positive and negative here that I have is just one. The story is interesting. There's good interesting and there's bad interesting. Now, there's two sides of this coin to me, because when I first played this game, I kind of did not like the story. However, once I got invested into, the gameplay and stuff, I didn't mind it. I thought the story was decent. It was okay. So that's what a positive and negative for me is, like a personal one. And I have some negatives here, but I don't particularly agree with this. I mean, I guess this can be a negative. It has the weakest soundtrack of all the Final Fantasy games I've mentioned so far. Tactics Advance compared to 7, 8, Crystal Chronicles and all that, probably one of the more weaker ones. Probably the weakest, in my opinion. However, saying that, the music is still great. I was listening to it while I was recording. Oh my gosh, man, I miss the music. The music was fantastic, and it makes you want to play the game. However, a negative I have on here that I cannot stress enough is that it can get grindy and a little repetitive. There are instances where I stopped playing this game after certain periods of time because it became grindy and kind of repetitive. And then when I got back to it, I was like, okay, this is pretty fun again. When I was playing it too much, it became kind of grindy and repetitive, but when I took my time, it was fun. And that's all I really have to say on Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. So let's move on to the next game. We're going on to Final Fantasy 3 now. So Final Fantasy 3 on the DS. Yes, I liked playing this one. The boss's character and music were, in my opinion, all top tier. I loved the intro music. I loved the dungeon music. I love the leveling up music. I love everything. Well, not everything music. Well, the music wise, yes. I don't think there was a missed beat with the music. Great. It makes you feel anguish, fear, uncertainty, hope, love, all that kind of stuff. You feel it in this game, more or less, because Final Fantasy 3 on the DS is more, Final Fantasy 3 in general, the main characters are well, I know in the original, I think they're 6 or 7-year-old kids, and in this game, they're just preteens, and they're doing they're doing things that adults are supposed to be doing, saving the world and stuff. And the fact that you can have a story like this presented through the eyes of these preteens is, it's really something. So another one right here, another positive I have here is that I would have enjoyed the game more if I didn't speedrun it. So now let's go into some negatives. And this negative, I think is warranted. A lot of people will agree. The last dungeon was a pain in the butt. I hated it. There's no way for you to say you can only quick save. I like that you can quick save, but you can't actually save in this dang dungeon. So if you die, you gotta do it all over again. Gosh, man, I hated that. I got to Arimon or whoever, I forgot there was a boss in there. Died to the boss. Had to do the whole dungeon again. I was like, oh my god. And here's the thing, you have to go into a dungeon before you go to the final dungeon. There's a portal that leads you to Pandemonium or some crap. So you have to do that again. So I should say final dungeons, but technically it's you go into this place that's the dungeon, and then it's just ha ha ha, screw you. This is actually the final dungeon. So haha, screw you, that final dungeon sucks. Anyways, and then the other thing was that I think because I had such a harrowing moment in that final dungeon, as well as like I think fighting certain bosses, I became less compelled to play this game. Or, I'm sorry, not play this game, because I'll still play the game, it's just completing it. Like, I'm telling you, I had such a bad experience in that freaking last dungeon that like I just do not want to play the game again. I don't want to complete it, not play it, complete it again. It's just, yeah. I think there are several YouTubers that can tell you how ridiculous that is. Anyways, let's go on to the next game. And that next game is Final Fantasy IV Advance. Yes. And up until this point, before I continue. So when I first did this, well, not when I first did this list, but of the Final Fantasy games I was exposed to and played thus far, Final Fantasy IV was one of my favorite ones. It wouldn't become my favorite until a tiny bit later, but it was definitely one of my favorites. And this version of Final Fantasy IV is my favorite. To this day, I still haven't beaten the DS version of 4 yet, but I have played. And so far, I love the DS version. However, I have beaten Final Fantasy IV Advance from beginning to end at least 3 times. I love this version. So yeah, I love Final Fantasy IV. Nearly everything in this game I enjoyed. You know, there are some small finicky parts, but I'll explain that kind of in the negative section. The first Final Fantasy game I completed at 100%. That's something I love to say. It's a great feeling for me, I guess. And it made me a fan from this point on. And so thus I started collecting the games physically or digitally, which again, I'll explain more so in the next part. Because up until this point, like it's either games that my brother had or games I've emulated. So this is still being emulated. But it was from Final Fantasy IV Advance, I think, when I beat it the 3rd time. And here's the thing, beginning to end, 3 times. That's when I said, you know what, I need to start buying these games because I really, really want to like own them. You know, like I know they say like something about emulating. Emulating's free and great, but like when you really love something, you want to own it. Like you want to get yourself a physical copy of it. So I know I have a physical copy of 4 Advance, 1 and 2 Dawn of Souls, I think. I know I have 1 and 2 Origins, but I think I have 1 and 2 Dawn of Souls too. Now let's go on to like, I still have more positives here. I got a lot more positives actually. So there's a lot of influence in my life for this game. Like because of the 100%ing, starting and completing things over and over and over again. That's kind of like a positive and a negative thing, because I think it's from this game that like I stopped. I think before I used to be a person that would dive into a new game. My brother, like my older brother, he got me into like I was playing Rainbow Six Vegas, right? And then like that Thanksgiving or something, when I got my Xbox 360, he got me Gra 2, Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter 2, and Rainbow Six Vegas 2. And even though I didn't finish Vegas 1, I still went in and I was like, I'm going to try this game out. I think from this game, I kind of was like more scared or more anxious to try something because this game was so dang good. So as I said, it can be a positive and a negative. I do that a lot, like with movies, TV shows, you know, like anime. I'd rather feel safe and not waste my time with something I may or may not like or feel like I wasted my time in, rather than like enjoy the journey. And this game just had that big influence on me. It was the one that kind of did it for me. Like I would have like a bunch of PlayStation 2 games, play them all, and then maybe I'll beat like 1 or 2 or something, then go back and beat the other 1 or 2, right? It was from this game that I kind of just like got scared of starting stuff. Just didn't, you know, like, yeah, I feel like it was just like the time, like wasting time kind of thing. because I loved it so much. I had a thing on here where I would name my consoles after like Cecil and Kane. Still do that. This is a great introduction to the ATB battle system, active time battle system. So I shouldn't say battle system, ATB battle system, just ATB system. It keeps the combat engaging. It didn't overcomplicate it. So it expanded the combat system by making it more engaging, more on your toes, more focused, and at the same time not, like throwing your hair out. Like it was pretty dang good. It was fantastic. And the last thing I cannot stress enough, which is why I love to play this game from beginning to end, was they added content in the game, as well as slightly better localization. However, I kind of like the old localization a little bit more, but I like how it adds to the story and the lore. Now, with all good things, there has to be some negatives. I don't have any positive negatives here other than maybe the influence thing. The bad drop rates and the sudden ending. The way I always explain this is like, as I said, I've beaten this from beginning to end 3 times, so I can say this. There were times, I think the first time I did it, I didn't get everything, not knowing that there was some things I can get. Like there was like special summons, there was certain items I can trade in to get better equipment. So the second time I played it from beginning to end, I was like, I'm gonna get all this stuff, and I realized the drop rate was just atrocious. Even playing. So I'm gonna go more into this one. It goes into the other negative, which it sucks that the game took me so long to beat the second time, even at 3 times speed. It was bad. The drop rates are just horrendous. And then to me, as a person who beat this game 3 times, it is not worth getting everything in the game. There's no, to me, and maybe on the DS it would probably feel a little bit different, but on the advanced version, it was a waste of time. And there was no point in getting the strongest armor in the game if it's just going to be for one dungeon. Literally just, and the final boss, I beat it on my first attempt and my first playthrough. The final boss isn't even hard. Zeromus is not difficult. He does not need these strong things. You can argue maybe that some of the super bosses or something, right? Sure, but again, it's for one boss. And but I think I was more pissed off at the sudden ending. You beat the boss and you're just okay, maybe there's a little bit more. Maybe there's a Dragon Quest 3 kind of thing where you beat Zeromus, but there's actually somebody else. Nope, game's just over. Bada bang, bada boom. Okay, well, I still liked it. It was more of a journey than a destination kind of game, so I'll end it with that. Let's move on to the next Final Fantasy game. And that Final Fantasy game is Final Fantasy V for the Android. Oh my god. It's going to be a hard one for me to talk about. So, I will start with some positives. I was more invested into Final Fantasy V. Well, before I start that, I bought Final Fantasy V. Remember how I said before I would buy things more physically or digitally? I did purchase Chronicles, Final Fantasy Chronicles, which includes 4 and Chrono Trigger, and I bought Final Fantasy 9. I would eventually buy 8 and 7 a little bit later, but that was a little bit later. Within this time frame of buying 5, I bought 9 and Chronicles, and I did start them. However, I'm going to save that for part 3, and I'll explain a little bit more on why it's more in part 3 than it is in part 2. Because I do have notes here for both of them in part 2, but I kind of I'm this actually makes more sense to put in part 3. But 5 on Android, I bought that digitally, and I played this one more than I played Chronicles and 9 when, I bought them. So, 9. Oh, no, I'm sorry, 5 on the Android. I can say, with certainty that I was more invested in this gameplay than 3's gameplay. They're very similar, in the sense that they have a job system that you can change, like over time. Like you have job levels, you have the actual level. And then going a little bit more on that, like is a bigger and better job system. So, you got that going for it. And in the Android version, they have a fast forwarding feature, which is a godsend. I love that because this grinding in this game, okay, before I get to that, I have actually 2 positive and negatives on this one. Okay, touch controls. Like the touch controls were in the very beginning of the game, they weren't a distraction per se, because the very beginning of the game is, easy. It's not difficult. However, when you get a little bit later and you have to, you're a little more frantic on the controls, like, oh my gosh, I need to friggin' beat this boss before it kills like a certain character. Guess what? The controls can kind of get in the way, and I didn't like that. And like it happened a few instances. Like I'm pretty sure it's a lot better now. However, I'm not holding my breath if it stayed the same. Well, I know that I can put a controller in now, but I didn't have a controller that I can plug into my phone back then. And then the other positive negative is the graphics. I don't particularly care that the graphics look like they do. Like they're kind of sharp, pointy. However, looking at it, it kind of looks lazily done. And from a company like Square Enix, like allowing another company to focus on their franchises is pretty lazy. It's kind of like they didn't care. They just wanted to make some money. $15.99 to be exact. I remember how much it cost. $15.99 for something that looks like this. The presentation doesn't look great. Some of the, like character models are, not character models, but the character portraits are okay. But everything else kind of looks rough and a little lazy. But as I said, I didn't really mind it per se. I was just happy that I had a Final Fantasy V. Speaking of, since I played this piece of, I won't say feces, but since I played this game, I was like, this was a waste of money. Going on to that, this is the only negative I have. I stopped playing this game because it was just not good. The grinding was atrocious. So now we're going to talk about the last game I want to talk on here, which is Final Fantasy V Advance. Final Fantasy V Advance, compared to like Final Fantasy V on Android, I think there was just, the reason I put fast forwarding as such a positive feature for 5 on the Android is because the grinding can be kind of difficult, or not difficult, but the grinding in the very, I would say like kind of in the beginning it's really, really difficult to bypass. So I like that there was a fast forwarding feature, because in order to make like some of these bosses really easy, you had to like grind. You don't want to just beat the boss. You want to kill the boss. So that quality of life feature wasn't included in this version. There's a little more negatives than there's positives in this. The only positive is like I got further than the Android version, and there was better UI and presentation. The sprites, the graphics were a little bit more vibrant, I guess. The character models in the text box were better. However, like I couldn't finish this version because the grinding was just, it got to me. I'm not the kind of person that like wants to 100% everything. I don't mind if I do, like if it's accessible, if it's easy enough for me to do, I'll do it. But if it's gonna be really difficult, I'm not even gonna bother. And with this game, I didn't even bother. Like I would eventually beat Final Fantasy V, spoiler alert, but I couldn't do it with this version. There wasn't enough changes compared to like 2 on the SNES than there was like on 4 Advance. Like 4 Advance like changed so many things, like the drop rate. The drop rate was terrible, but like some of the spells work. There was a lot of quality of life improvements. 5 originally was already really good. So it's kind of hard for you to like one up that, other than just giving it better audio, better presentation, and like, you know, like I think that's all they really did. I mean, maybe a better localization, better translation of the game. Other than that, I mean, that's all I can really say for 5 Advanced. Like, comparing it to the other 5 versions, like, that's the only thing I can really say. Like, it's like I'm pretty much playing the same thing. I would rather play the Android version, sadly. But, you know, saying that, this is going to be the end of my history of Final Fantasy Part 2. Next week will be my history of Final Fantasy Part 3. Yes, my history of Final Fantasy Part 3, the one that I can finally say that I am doing and not getting ahead of myself. But anyways, everyone, that'll be this video. Can't wait until next week. That was my stomach growling. I need to eat something. Adios.